So if I can ask people, we will now start the inaugural meeting of the Hampshire and Solent Combined County Authority. So it falls on me to welcome everyone, to welcome the elected members, chief execs of constituent authorities, officers of constituent authorities and of the setup team, press, members of the public to this first meeting. And to the hundreds, if not thousands, watching online, we're really pleased you've been able to join us for this significant day in the region, whereby the county as a whole, the cities, the districts, the island, partners and stakeholders that have been part of this collaborative partnership and will be part of the partnership in the future can come together so that we can really mobilise the strengths of devolution brings us. I am going to hand over to the monitoring officer for the first item on the agenda, which is the election of members to the Combined County Authority.
Thank you, Chief Executive. My name is Susan Zeiss. I am the Interim Director, Law and Governance and Monitoring Officer for Hampshire and the Solent Combined Authority. The first item on today's agenda, as the Chief Executive has said, is to receive the appointments from each constituent council to the Hampshire and the Solent Combined Authority Board. These are they're not displayed on the slide in front of you. They're on your item in the recommendations. So do members all agree the appointments? Do they agree to receive these appointments? Thank you. Now I'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the election of the chair and vice chair. I'll start first with the chair. Do I have a proposer for chair?
Propose Councillor Nick Adams-King as chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Do I have a seconder?
I second, thank you.
Thank you very much. So are there any other nominations? Always doing it the wrong way around, I beg your pardon. As there are no other nominations, I declare that Councillor Nick Adams-King is the chair of the Hampshire and the Solent Combined County Authority Board. Congratulations. I'd now like to take nominations for vice chair. Is there a proposer?
I'm happy to propose Councillor Jonathan Bacon.
Thank you, Councillor Masrick. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? As there are no further nominations, I'm happy to announce that Councillor Bacon is the Vice Chair of the Hampshire and the Solent Combined County Authority Board. Thank you very much. Chair, would you like to take over?
Yep. Susan, thank you so much for running through that, and thanks to Ruth for her introduction as well. I'm delighted and extremely proud to be elected chair. Thank you very much. Before we go any further, I just wanted to say a few words to recognise the considerable work that's brought us to this point. The creation of the Hampshire and the Solent Combined County Authority has not happened overnight. It's the culmination of many years of discussion, negotiation and careful preparation involving councillors, officers, government, business and partners from across the entire region. I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to that journey, and particularly the many officers who have devoted an enormous amount of time and energy and professional expertise to establish the authority, ensuring that we are able to meet today on firm foundations. And especially I'd like to acknowledge the chief executives of each of the establishing councils, so Natalie and Gillian and Wendy and Gary, for all of your hard work and that of your teams, because we wouldn't have been possible for us to be here today without that. Your leadership and persistence and close collaboration has been central to navigating an extremely complex process and turning our shared ambition into a functioning combined authority. They, together with their officer teams, deserve our thanks. And I would also like to just recognise 3 former council leaders who played an important part in bringing us here. So Alex Winning and Lorna Fielker, Sarah's predecessors as leader of Southampton, and Phil Jordan, who is Jonathan's predecessor as leader of the Isle of Wight. The democratic process can sometimes be unpredictable and unforgiving, and there is a real sadness for me that they're not present today to see the work to which they contributed put into action, but their role in reaching this point should nevertheless be acknowledged and appreciated. So today work that marks the beginning of a new chapter. It's now for us all around this table to build upon that work to establish a strong and effective authority ready for a mayor when they are elected, and to ensure that devolution delivers practical and lasting benefits for the people and communities we collectively serve. And I know amongst the five of us determined that. There's one other thing that we should just mention, which is that there will be other members of the Combined Authority Board who will be joining us over time, and this is an iterative process for us as we move along. But the districts and boroughs in Hampshire will be getting members to join us as non-constituent members, and one of those leaders is here, who's already been nominated. So Phil, I don't know whether to come up and join us for this part of the meeting. Phil North is the leader of Test Valley and will be one of those. I understand David Neighbour's not here, is he? So David Neighbour will be the representative, the second representative, and as we go along, other join us as we. But you're very welcome, Phil, to the board.
Well, just to say thank you very much, Chairman. I think I'm here as the representative of the Mid-Hampshire cluster. We agreed at our last all leaders meetings that the district and borough representatives come from those two new unitaries that aren't represented by main cities and the island. The government has decided to do with local. So I sit here with a Mid-Hampshire hat on, and hopefully a northern colleague will join me in the next.
So the next item on our agenda is just to check whether there are any apologies for absence, and I can see that we are. You can tell me that, will you? Yeah. And then any declarations of interest for any items on the agenda. Okay. So the next item is to consider whether the press and public should be excluded from the meeting during consideration of any item on the agenda. There's no indication in the reports included in the agenda that this is going to be required, and therefore, unless we have any further advice or information provided, the rest of the agenda can remain in open session. Okay, so we move on to the governance arrangements for the Hampshire and Solent Combined County Authority. And I think Susan's going through those.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Executive. So members, I will assume that the paper has been read and won't go through it line by line, but it has within it the main components for the new authority to operate constitutionally, effectively, and in compliance with the legislation. So I had a brief discussion with the chair before, and I think it would be most convenient to take each one of the recommendations in turn. And so if we start, I'll just summarize all of the sections and then the chair will take each one of the recommendations in turn. So first of all, the Constitution. This was drafted by the monitoring officers in conjunction with other officers of the constituent authorities. It is a living document. It will change from time to time. It is something that will get us over the line right now to be compliant with our legislative requirements, but may well be shaped and formed by this board and the needs of the authority going forward. The local assurance framework has been agreed with MHCLG as a reassurance to government that this authority will comply with certain things that are the aims of creating a combined authority. So that is there in the agenda. The third one is the designation of the non-constituent members, which we've heard a little about already. The first step in that process is for this board to nominate the nominating body, which is the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Local Government Association. After that, it is to ask the Chief Exec to write to that body for their consent to having been nominated and then receive their nominations at the next meeting of the authority. Then if we move to recommendation D, these are a list of the policies that this organization needs to have in place from day one. There is a much longer list, which it would be good for the authority to have over time, and these are all in development, particularly our HR and staff-related policies. Please note, though, that the whistleblowing policy already forms part of the Constitution, but those other policies are appendices to this report. Then we have some delegations at the end, all of which will be in consultation with the chair, vice chair, or the board as a whole. The first one to be to set up an independent remuneration panel in order to set recommendations for members' allowances. You may have noticed in the passing of the English Devolution Act that there have been additional opportunities for special responsibility allowances for members, in addition to the initial provision for allowances only to be for members of overview and scrutiny and for audit and governance committees. Then also the recruitment of an independent member for the Governance and Audit Committee, or to set up the process for that, obviously for the board to appoint, and then to set up a recruitment process for the independent persons for our Standards Committee, which is run through Audit and Governance in this authority. And then lastly, a delegation to the Chief Executive to, in discussion with the board, to create a process for the appointment of the chair of the business board. Now, if you'll bear with me a moment, I think there was a proposed amendment to that recommendation, and I have some amendments to the Constitution that I also need to just draw your attention to. So I'm going to read out this amendment because it's not on your chairs, whereas the amendments to the Constitution have already been circulated and put on chairs. So the delegation to the Chief Executive, there's a proposal that it's amended as follows. To delegate to the Chief Executive, in consultation with the board, the responsibility of guiding the process of recruiting an interim chair of the business board in consultation with business communities across the Hampshire and the Solent Combined County Authority area. So that is the new proposed amended recommendation F. But in the Constitution, there are two recommended amendments which have been placed on your chairs. One is in connection with the levels of delegation to officers for spend, and another is an amendment to the membership of the Transport Committee to reflect the committee system nature of the administration on the Isle of Wight. Thank you, Chair.
So much, Susan. So hopefully that's made sense to everybody. Steve, I know that you were keen that the arrangements for the selection of somebody to chair the business board then become a member of this board. Just want to talk through that record of.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was mainly to get some clarification for members of the business community who will no doubt be engaging with viewing today's meeting at some point, either live or otherwise, and wanting feedback more locally about the process. And as drafted, it was slightly opaque as to what that process will be. So we've just we had a discussion to clarify that, and it's clear that the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, Ruth, will work with the local business communities. We already have Hampshire Prosperity Board, we already have the Silent Growth Partnership Board, Business Board at the moment, and it's really important that we are making sure that the chair of that business board is representative of our business communities across the combined authority area, and not somebody who could look like they were appointed by us. So that was certainly our intention, but the wording didn't really help. So hopefully the clarified amended wording will make it very clear to our business community that's our intent.
I think we're all in agreement with that approach, so that's all good. So any other debate or any comments from George?
Chair, yeah, I just got a question in relation to the Constitution before we approve it. Obviously, the Constitution requires a unanimous vote of all constituent members, and when the mayor gets elected, the mayor as well. What provisions, obviously prior to me joining this process, what provisions or discussions were put in place in relation to maybe an alternative model like a supermajority or majority? Because needless to say, if you've got a lot of heads in the room not agreeing with the thing, and I'm not talking about anything necessarily contentious, but as the process goes on, needless to say, we are going to find, like we all do, and we still do in our constituent councils that we are in now, we always find things that could be improved or simplified or expedited. what backstops or provisions are there in place for sensible amendments to the constitution to be made if we do have somebody that's, you know, not necessarily between the five of us, but who later down the line may be rogue and not want to approve sensible constitutional changes?
So I'll let Susan answer, but I think the requirement for unanimity is something that only lasts until a mayor is elected. So once that happens, the purpose being that when we all anticipated this meeting would be chaired by the first elected mayor, and when the government changed their mind in December about holding that election in May, we found ourselves in a position where we were establishing a combined authority amongst the councils without a mayor in place with a direct democratic mandate to be able to take things forward. So the unanimity issue is something that is temporary until such time as the mayoral election provides a chair of this board by way of an elected mayor. But then beyond that, just to clarify, it's a matter of majority voting in large part, or the mayor's decision in a way.
In most cases, certainly yes. And if there's not an agreement reached, then the matter is taken to not be agreed. If, you know, if there's a stalemate, there's no provision for a casting vote. But there are exceptions, and the legislation does specifically provide that on matters of the constitution and agreeing the budget, it has to be unanimous, I think, even after.
Yeah, and that's the point I raised while reading it, is that I've noticed that it had to be unanimous with all members and the mayor. That's the only thing I'd raise as a slight air of caution.
Is that in the legislation?
Yes, it's in the regulations. I can send a note round after the meeting.
Every day's a school day. So thanks for raising that. I think that's an important point for us to consider. Jonathan.
Or that. Sure. Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the amendment in respect of the chair of the Transport Committee and thank and give thanks for the amendment once that was brought to the officer's attention. I think that's probably raised that issue of the different governance system on the island going forward, because I expect this might come up again in the future, but hopefully if something does come through that has that issue again, this gives guidance as to any future amendments or changes, or indeed drafting that might be appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah?
I've just got one. I should have raised this before, but just one question I've had around transport. Obviously, there's going to be a transition period. We're going to have transport representatives from each council meeting as a board as well. So in terms of, there's just a risk to manage, I guess, in terms of potential dual track governance around what's happening within the existing local authorities and future, plus combined authority in terms of sign off of major transport projects which can cross boundaries. So it was more just to flag there might be some issues around that, particularly where some of the big ones cut across different areas. So it's really just a risk to manage rather than a particular question.
Yeah, but it's well made. We are in the process of working through the transitional arrangement for the dual running of transport concurrent powers, and are working with the reps of every transport authority to sort of look at the timing of things, the sequencing of things, the shared risks of things. So there'll be a lot more information on that as we start to get into working through what the sequencing of activity in that programme of transition is.
So that's great. Now, I think it's just trying to get a head around how this is going to actually work in practice, because there's lots of decisions and plans that are for quite a long term in the programmes.
It's related to Sarah's comment, actually. There was a decision made to passport through automatically a bunch of transport funding to the upper tier local authorities for this financial year, because this meeting will be after the start of the financial year, and therefore that needed to happen. I am, though, minded that some of the upper tier local authorities, because of the way budgets are constructed, will be capitalising some of the, or rather switching to revenue, some of the funding for transport. And I think that does particularly affect the county and Portsmouth. I'm not quite so sure about the Isle of Wight and Southampton, but it does mean we can't delay a further passporting through for very long, because people will be into budget rounds for next year and they'll need certainty over their staffing. So that is something we're going to have to address quite quickly. It was raised with me last week, and it was only when Sarah mentioned something similar that it reminded me.
Super, thanks. Any other comments, everybody? Yeah.
Can I just follow up on obviously what I was saying? So are members happy to approve the constitution as it is today, and then maybe we go away and just look at this backstop in relation to unanimous voting decisions? Because I do think that if this is my caution, is that obviously if it's unanimous after the mayor as well, that's going to be a lot of bodies and a lot of political heads in a room that's got to agree on what could be sensible changes. I do think that we need to step back for a second and just look at how that could impact once the mayor's elected in relation to unanimous voting on the constitutional changes. So is this something that we could take away, so we could approve the constitution today, and then could we collectively go away, look at that, and then make a change in the future unanimously if we choose to? Does that make sense?
Through you, Chair, as it's in the legislation at the moment, it would require a change to the law, and that would have to go through a parliamentary process. So we could petition, the council could petition or approach government, but not agree to change it unilaterally themselves.
Thank you.
And I think the thing to remember is that it'll be the representatives of, so it's not the entirety of the board in terms of its non-constituent members. It would just be the constituent members who would be the people with the authority in the room. Yeah, 5 plus the mayor. And then on the assumption that new councils are created, of course, we're going to need to update the constitution to reflect the new council composition once those are elected by way of shadow councils next year. So that gives us an opportunity to lobby again at that point. But actually, there's another opportunity in the sense that we will have a new prime minister within the next 7 to 10 days. And given that Prime Minister looks like being the Mayor of Greater Manchester, or the former Mayor of Greater Manchester, then I think it gives us an opportunity to write to him, and not only welcoming him, but also asking for him to allow us to put our foot to the floor with our plans, raising that issue as one of those that we might want to put in front of them. But also asking that we bring the mayoral election forward to next year, because the sooner we have the mayor, the sooner this authority can properly undertake all of its functions and also receive the full amount of funding that we have been promised by government. So if you're all in agreement with around that, I'll make sure that we send a joint letter from all of us to the new Prime Minister once he is appointed, and get that underway. So we've got a couple of amendments that we just need to agree. So are we happy with the amendments that have been proposed? And so are we happy to agree the governance arrangements and the constitution as amended? So if I go through them individually, number A is to approve and adopt the constitution at Appendix A. Happy with that? Yeah. To approve the local assurance framework at B. Designate the HIOLA as the nominating body for the 2 initial non-constituent members, one of whom will be Phil and the other David Neighbour has agreed. I believe you're meeting at the end of the month to be able to do that, so should then be happens. That's C. Yeah. D, approve the policies that have been listed in paragraph 3.4 of this report. Happy. Delegate to the interim monitoring officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair the authority to establish the independent remuneration panel, make recommendations to the future board meeting, advertise for the independent persons for the standards board, and to take steps to recruit the take steps to basically come into agreements with the other constituent councils. It's all in E. Happy with those? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then F, we've got the amended wording that we've agreed for the recruitment of independent chair of the business board, and as Steve has eloquently pointed out, to ensure, hopefully by way of those amendments, that it is the business community who choose their business representative for this board, without any of us politicians getting our fingers all over it. So, all agreed? Super, thanks. So in which case, that takes us back to item 7, which is the establishment of regulatory committees and their composition and the political proportionality, which is Susan again, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So under our regulations, the Hampshire and the Solent Combined Authorities Regulations 26, and I'll just call them the overview and scrutiny regs because they've got such a long title, 2024, we are required to achieve as best we can political balance across not only this board, but to reflect the political balance of the constituent authorities that comprise this combined authority. The calculation that officers have used is a recognized methodology that's been used across combined authorities for some time. But I know that there has been a discussion about whether or not we could have done it in a different way. And yes, we could. A certain amount of leeway is under the discretion when you're doing these calculations. And we did look at whether or not if we included independent members, which haven't been included in this particular calculation. The first calculation only took into account all those parties registered with the Electoral Commission. But if we have a look at what would happen to the calculation if we included independent groups as well and independent members as well, at this stage, it doesn't make any difference to the political balance calculation. But we recognize in future, as and when circumstances change, this will need to be kept under review and that we will look at it again in the future. But for the moment, this is what we are recommending to all. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Susan. Jonathan, did you want to just mention your point about the different groups on the island?
Well, I think the basic point has been made, but yes, the island certainly for the last few years has traditionally had quite a large number of independents. At the moment, it's over a quarter of the membership, and certainly it's been the majority in the past. So there was a little bit of disquiet when the paper came out, and that was seen by members across the island, not just those who are independents. So I'm happy with the approach that's suggested. I note it makes no difference at this stage, if we get to a stage where it does make a difference, which I can see, and the independents wouldn't be the smallest group overall if you add everyone together at this stage, which I think would be the proposal. There are various different independent amalgamations, but if one takes independents as a group, whatever the different factions might call themselves, and factions is the wrong word, then I think we'll get where we need to be, if that makes sense.
Super, thanks. Any other comments? So the recommendations for this are on pages 399 to 404, and I'm happy to propose those. I think we need a second, Steve. Everyone in favour? Agreed. Super, thanks very much. That's all agreed. And so our next item is item 8, which is the appointment of statutory officers. Welcome, Polly, who's going to talk us through those arrangements.
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm Polly Hicks, the Head of People and OD. This paper really talks about one of the key requirements in setting up HSCCA is the establishment of statutory officers. And this paper really talks about the process for doing that in terms of the head of paid service, the chief exec, the section 73 finance director and the monitoring officer. There's 5 main recommendations in this report, but the broad thrust of it is at this point in time, my personal recommendation is that they're all interim appointments at this point in time. And I'm really happy to take any questions.
Super, thanks so much. Any questions for Polly? Phil?
Yeah, just a question on those interim appointments. So there are interim appointments until when, and does that give the mayor a bit of time to then work with those people if they're still in post, so the mayor could then recruit if the mayor's minded to recruit, or also to continue if they want to continue, bearing in mind we assume the elections will be in May 28, even though we're potentially requesting that they come forward a year. Thank you.
I must apologise. I think to clarify, what I should have said was that we've currently got interim appointments, and then in the paper we talk about the Director for Finance and then the Monitoring Officer. They will be permanent appointments. It's the Chief Exec role that is an interim appointment.
Until when?
And that is until May 2028.
Yeah, I know whilst I've got a conflict of interest, yeah, I'm appointed on a fixed term basis at Council North until the Mayor comes in, because you're absolutely right. That is a decision that the Mayor might want to make in conjunction with other members of the board about what leadership they want.
Any other questions or comments? So we've got 5 recommendations. They're all on page 405. And that, as Polly has said, is to appoint Ruth on a fixed term basis until 2028, when the Mayor will be in post. To approve Debbie as the interim Chief of Finance Officer and Susan as the interim Monitoring Officer. Then to appoint Adam as the Chief Finance Officer, and to note that we have a recruitment process underway for Monitoring Officer. So are you happy to take those together? I'm happy to propose those. Seconder, Jonathan. Everyone in favour? Yep, all agreed. Super, thank you very much. In which case then we're on to item 9, which is our budget, and I think Debbie's going to run through that.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the authority's first budget for approval. It also recommends approval for delegated authority to the Chief Executive in conjunction with the Section 73 to accept future funds. Also to approve the use of earmarked reserves, and finally to approve the arrangements for audit. The paper sets out the pre-vesting financial position on the funding administered on the authority's behalf by Southampton Council. It then considers the budget, which covers our first part year of operation following vesting in June. I think it's important to note that as a newly established organisation, we don't have any historical financial baseline. So the budget has been developed using the best information we have at this point in time, and should be regarded very much as an interim budget that will continue to evolve and be brought back to this committee for further approvals. The report also explains the known funding streams available to us during 26-27 and tries to lay out how these resources will support both the establishment of the organisation and also development of our investment programmes. The budget has been, it is balanced, and in the budget we've included provision for both contingency and for reserves. Contingency for 26-27 is higher than I would be proposing for the future years, and that simply reflects the risk in the fact that we haven't got any known benchmarks to plan with for this particular year. And the budget is underpinned by some clearly defined assumptions, and I've also detailed the main financial risks at this moment in time, so you can see those. And again, both of those will be monitored and tracked, and if there are any issues, that will be brought back to committee. The budget, 27-28 budget and the medium-term plan will also now be developed, and those longer term views will take into account areas such as transport and skills, and those, along with a number of associated finance policies which are detailed in the paper, will be brought back to the committee for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Super, thanks very much, Debbie. Colleagues, we've got recommendations on page 411 in under A to D. I think probably the best thing is to ask whether there are any questions of Debbie first before we debate it. Steve.
Yeah, hi Debbie, and apologise for not raising this in advance, but I remember that when I looked at the budget papers, and I'm going to come back to talk about growth hubs a little bit later in the discussion, but we received 476,000 split between the 2 growth hubs for this financial year, but in the budget you've got 437,000 for the growth hubs. Just wondered why there was a discrepancy.
Yeah, it may be a presentational issue. Actually, in our budget, in terms of income, we've got 480,000, it's down as, and then that is split in the paper, 437 for provision, and then there's 43,000, which is actually included in the paper in the staffing line. So those two figures come to that figure. Yeah,
So
thank you.
just to follow up on that, then, just from a broader perspective, noting that this is an interim budget, I personally find it really helpful if by the next meeting we could have a lot more information to underpin the financial table. I'm very used to, in my own council, seeing a full breakdown of what each line is going to and how it's going to be spent, particularly on the overall staffing cohort. So if we could get some more detail, I think things like that would be easier to spot.
Yep, that's no problem. We've got all that information in the background, so yes, that's fine.
Any other questions of Debbie? George?
Just one point of clarity, obviously in the revenue forecast, it does state about the elections from the investment fund, 1.8 million. Just for clarity, that's to go into reserves, isn't it, for the future election? It
is. What we will do is we're starting to build, hopefully from this year, a reserve for the mayoral elections, which is estimated to be £6 to £7 million. And then every year following that, we will put money to one side to make sure we can cover the costs in future years. So that will be a regular thing in the budget.
The cost is substantial, isn't it? And I think this is another reason that it's good that we write to the new Prime Minister to encourage him to bring the mayoral election in line with next year's local government reorganisation elections. I think, you know, their argument is that they're doing local government reorganisations to save so much money, right? That's the principle. Although I don't agree with that principle, that's the principle. And it would make a lot more sense to amalgamate all the elections into one to actually save the taxpayer here money. Because, you know, when you're talking about figures of 6 to 7 million just for a singular election that's not on the same year, may I add, as proposed local government reorganisation elections, it seems foolish.
Exactly that. And on the current timetable, we will elect unitary councils by shadow next year. And then the mayoral election, therefore, will stand alone in 2028 under its current timetable, which is why there's so much money needing to be allocated to it. Not least equally that everyone's going to receive a nice booklet with all the mayoral candidates in them.
Potentially it's good practice then, Chair, for us in this meeting today to unanimously agree that we are going to write to the Prime Minister. I know you mentioned it before, but maybe it's good practice that we formally do that collectively as a united group of people representing different political parties and independent, that we support the mayoral election, most point to save money as well.
That's a very good reason to do that. So we can make sure that the letter that we send reflects that, if everyone's in agreement. Yeah. Good, thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, it's just to follow up. I mean, as Councillor Pitter said, I think we just need a bit more detail behind these numbers. It's quite hard to actually figure out what each one actually means. You know, 86,000 on education is a pretty small amount. So it's like trying to understand, well, what is that going to do versus what we're going to go do in the future and how that relates to local authority spend. I think we need to remind ourselves as well that, you know, the actual numbers of people working directly for the combined authority is still going to be quite small, and most of the delivery will still be at the local authority level, but it's understanding what new levers we have in terms of this additional funding, and so we can spend it as well as we can.
I think in terms of us taking this forward, we are in the place where we are in a position where it becomes an iterative process again for us, and so there should be much more information that we can gather as we get to the next meeting and so on, begin to see as it runs through. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I'll return to the growth hubs issue now, as we found out partway through last financial year, in fact towards the end of the financial year, that instead of there being 2 growth hubs in Hampshire, one which was led by Hampshire County Council and one which was led by Southern Growth Partnership, both of which had received, I believe, 311,000 a year for their work, that we were given a combined amount because we were going to be becoming a combined authority, which actually meant there was a cut, and we got the 476,000 instead. So that was a reduction in growth hub funding for both the current activity carried out by the County Council and also that activity carried out by the Solent Growth Partnership. Now, there has been some discussion since about how we can ensure that while we're transitioning, we do not lose the current level of activity, because that was funded by 311 for each growth hub, and currently the money available is less. So the growth partnerships had some discussions about backfilling that amount to make sure we don't lose activity during this year. I just discussed it with Nick as well, and I think we urgently need to understand by the next meeting whether there is sufficient resources available to top that money up, so that for this financial year we are actually making sure that both hubs receive what they would have received, which is 311,000, but also that going forward our growth hub activities are not diminished because of the government reduction in funding, and the combined authority is absolutely an opportunity to make sure they're not. So that was one point. The second point I wanted to make was a bit wider than that. I'm aware that in the Solent area there are bits where we have augmented other government funding that's come through, particularly for skills and adult education work, and there is pressure around that funding that if we continue to just allow the statutory amounts to go through, the inevitability will be that the amount of work happening across the whole of Hampshire and the Solent will be diminished. So we do, and I'm aware that all of the staff team, both from the county side and also from the Solent, have fed all that information into the combined authority. I think I would like to see a paper come back in September, seeing what that looks like overall, because we want to make sure that at the very least we all continue to do what we're currently doing for the rest of the financial year. But no, we didn't get into this venture to start reducing things of that strategic importance. We got into this to drive more funding and investment into those things. So if we could see what that might look like at the earliest possible opportunity, that would be hugely appreciated.
Thank you. If I come back initially on that, then Ruth might want to add. I think from the financial perspective, for the skills, for the growth hub, for transport, it is very early days in terms of planning, and there'll be a lot of consultation and thinking to do. That will happen or start to happen as part of the budget setting process, because we'll be receiving some of those funds next year. Therefore, we will need to understand how we're going to allocate and manage those funds as part of the budget setting process. But there will be wide consultation, and I'm sure Ruth will want to come in on that and expand.
I was just going to draw your attention in section 3.7.3. It summarises very briefly. Sorry, let me. Just looking at the section. It's got a heading summary of revenue and capital, and just to come to the point. 419. Sorry.
Sorry, 419.
It does highlight in that second table on that page that the revenue investment fund received this year remaining to be distributed, and the capital investment fund remaining to be distributed. The numbers are there, so there is discussions that can be done about how that's allocated. That again we need to do, because that's this year's, that's available now. So that is a not insignificant amount for us to sort of plan to.
That's understood and appreciated, Ruth, but just to come back at Debbie, it is this financial year that I'm most concerned about, because we have still got some time through the autumn to set next year's budgets, but any activity that, particularly the growth hub issue, I think needs to be resolved very quickly, because that's an immediate pressure on budgets where we're already trying to continue the level of activity that we each had with less money than we had before. So we really do need to find out whether there's the opportunity to backfill that now and then use that as the baseline moving forward.
Any other comments, everybody? Okay. Just to wrap up, I completely agree with you, Steve, and I think that there is funding clearly available to help support us do this. And I think the important thing for us to do, and I'm grateful to all of our colleagues, both in the Solent Growth Partnership and in the Prosperity Partnership in Hampshire, for them sending all the information in to Ruth. And by the autumn, I hope very much that we've got a place where we're able to see exactly what each is doing, understand where there's synergy, because ultimately we need one growth hub that's going to serve everybody, and ensure that the level of support that both the different constituent parts has received so far from each of their respective growth partnerships is able to be continued by the combined authority going forward, and then enhanced by it, I hope, as well, because that's the entire point of doing this. I know there's a lot of work already been done. There's an awful lot more to do to try and level them up and to see what each is doing, but I'm sure we can get there relatively quickly because of the advanced nature that each of them, in which each of them find themselves. If there are no other questions or debate, no. So we've got the recommendations in front of us, which are from A to D. They're on page 411. Happy to take them together as a group. I'm happy to propose them. Seconder, George, anyone? Oh, sorry, all of those in favour? Yeah, everyone happy? Thank you. That's unanimous again. So we're on to our next item, which is item 10, which is responding to the Young People and Work report. And that's Ruth.
Thank you. This paper is principally for discussion and debate, and certainly the debate will probably run long after this meeting into future meetings and future activity. The timing of this discussion is because we are midway between the publication of an interim report that was penned by the former MP Alan Milburn into young people who are not in education or employment, or as someone said to me last week, who are open for education and employment, more positive in many ways that this is a blight of people not through want of their own, who are not often being supported. Youth unemployment, as the paper discusses, a major social, ethical and economic drag on any economy. It brings with it wide-ranging social and personal issues in the short term, and in the long term can lead to intergenerational, multi-generational issues and challenges where families are without employment for substantive periods of time. As Combined County Authority members, considering the discussion elements raised in this paper, the CCA will have the power to convene. And one of the asks of this paper is to share views on how you would want to bring that together locally. Is there any further work we need to do? How do you want to task the emerging Skills and Employment Advisory Board? And how do we want to shape priorities, not just in what we spend and invest in, but in very much that power to convene? The discussion paper in the diagnosis led by Alan Milburn said it's a complex issue that is leading to youth unemployment. And section 3.1 talks about demand and supply issues. The demand issues that are calling a spike in youth unemployment, principally due to the fall in entry-level roles that traditionally have been open or accessed by young people. The shift to online shopping has reduced retail jobs. Some customer service jobs are going online. There's also, with apprenticeships, a trend for employers to use flexibilities in apprenticeships to appoint older apprentices, as opposed to the previous, where it was very restricted to young people. Supply issues very much point in this interim report to the growing issues of health challenges and mental health challenges, but also to a benefit system that sort of makes it very hard for young people to be able to live. The outcome of the interim report of Alan Milburn was that there is a real opportunity for the system and for combined authorities to ensure the system aligns around a common cause or objective about young people's employment. And the report calls for a system where there is a clear focus on the outcome of employment or employment as an outcome, as opposed to a preoccupancy with the achievement of a qualification and the fingers crossed approach to hoping that that will enable someone to find a job. The work we do on our growth plan, where it will be supported by a framework of outcomes that we as a combined authority wish to see, enables us to start sort of moving towards these recommendations about how important we view employment for young people in the way that we frame our work. The report poses a few questions for debate locally, and these could form further key lines of inquiry as we go through our inaugural year as a combined authority. But certainly the national pitch from the Melbourne team is that combined authorities are uniquely placed to turn fragmentation of the current system into a coherent local system that connects young people to work. They raise particular issues where they believe combined authorities can make an impact. Firstly, that too many young people are invisible when they leave mainstream education, especially if they don't sign on for benefits. And they query how combined authorities can improve data and analysis to understand where their young people are. The health and employment disconnects, which have been started to see work taking place in that area, need simplification and need amplification to make sure the connections are quite clear. Transport is a physical barrier to young people's employment, and that is something that, as we've discussed, is one of the things that the Combined County Authority will become the single transport authority in 2 years' time. Stimulating employer demand. So employers clearly have got workforce demands, but and yet there's a deficit in young people's employment. So what work do we want to do with our employers to really encourage a lot more job opportunities? There is a key role for the training and education sector in terms of vocational pathways and simplification, and not filling spaces on courses, but to really sort of understand what's in the best interest of a young person that will give them that employment outcome, as opposed to just doing a course that might be available to them. And the last point that the report made, where it said combined authorities have a really key role to play, is in the work it does with the voluntary and community sector, that particularly in some of the communities in places where there is the most deprivation, this is often the sector that has got the greatest reach to people that and young people that are at risk of being disengaged, and yet as a sector it is not seen as a key player in the system or securely funded and resourced to do this. So these really are, I suppose, some of the key provocations that, as the Combined Authority takes its agenda forward for skills, for its power to convene from this point, are areas that the board are encouraged to consider, are encouraged to think about how the Skills and Employment Advisory Board might take some of these issues forward, and how you want this to sort of play a part in the work we do now to formalise our growth plan and the outcomes that are really important for us to subsequently invest in and act in. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. That's really helpful. So, colleagues, any questions of Ruth around this item? Yeah, Phil.
Yeah, just a question in terms of why the importance of this now. I know it's obviously a really important subject, but reading the paper, there seems to be some sort of high level analysis done, but there isn't that sort of depth of analysis in terms of so what? So then what interventions can we make or potentially fund which will make a difference? And I'm not sure from reading this report, I'm really aware in terms of how that could help. I mean, from my point of view, actually, it would be good to support some of the harder to reach groups that haven't had any interventions before or are isolated for one reason or another. However, that might cost a significant amount of money, and actually then you've got to look for bang for buck. So none of that is in this paper at the moment. That's probably on purpose in terms of this is just to start the debate, but I'm finding it very difficult to sort of make any meaningful contribution on what we need to do going forward without that analysis and sort of diagnosis of the problem locally. Sorry, that might have been a comment rather than a question, but do you agree?
And certainly it fits in the first recommendation that your intervention fits in with that, which is to really consider and determine whether extra research, local analysis is needed. And I think you're suggesting you'd like to see a lot more in-depth work done on this area.
Sarah.
Just in terms of a question then, and I suppose a request, which we can all help with, is just understanding what we've got currently, because there's very patchy levels of provision in this space, and there's some quite specialist services, like, you know, we've got a young adults employment hub in Southampton, but I don't think there's something like that, say, in Tottenham, for example, or somewhere else, you know, so it's quite mixed in terms of the level of provision at the moment. And it's obviously currently funded through all sorts of routes. And that's the other thing I'd sort of like to really get under the bonnet of, if you like, is how much we can maybe explore something like a partnership with DWP, who often are one of the key funders rather than MHCLG, who are much more plugged into Devo. But so it's trying to understand how we could work with the flows of money in government through to us, and whether there's an opportunities to do something there, because still it's quite difficult to navigate at the moment, and how much is we can do versus how much maybe the local authorities can do. And at the same time, because we're going through LGR, there's a sort of interlink with that too, because I'm thinking once we get to the point we've got 5 local authorities rather than 15, then I guess it'll be a lot simpler in terms of at least they'll know what they've got. But while we're in that transition phase, you know, it's more about maybe embellishing on what we've already got, you know. So I suppose my request after that rather rambling question, sorry, is can we have a bit of mapping of existing provision and the funding for each of those provision? Because my sense is a lot of it is short-term funding, pots of money that have been bid for, many of which are quite time limited, resulting in very important work being done by people on fixed term contracts and stuff like that, which you know, our young people deserve, you know, permanent people supporting them in the right places at the right time. And I don't think we've got anything like that right now.
I'm not sure to come back or.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, that's exactly the sort of thing that we can take away to look at how we do that, how we map, how we look at the funding, how we look at DWP's plan. So yeah, thank you.
Going to go on a bit, I'm afraid. Just in responses to some of the points that are in the paper on page 7 of the 10-page paper. There's a bit about keeping young people visible, and ask some questions of officers around this. And I hadn't been aware of it, but the DFE ceased year 14 monitoring some time back, a few years ago. And that means that there's been a big national increase in young people who are, we just don't know where they've gone after they've left full-time education. Once you lose track of that, it's very difficult to then reach in and support individuals because you just don't know where they are. So one of the things we could potentially consider is to put that back in place for our area. So we actually do map and track where young people are going and making sure that they are supported. The second point around health and work, Connect to Work programme, which is underway at the moment. There's the Adult Supported Employment programme. We commence work with formally connecting services such as the referral agencies, particularly the GP and mental health services, which support complex health conditions, which has proven to be quite successful. The MCCA could consider further strategic work to support this with funding across the NEET age group, NEET cohort specifically within the ages of 16 and 24. But there is also a link in here through my health and well-being experiences that the influence the ICB can bring to bear is significant with the implementation of Work Well as a linked health programme commencing regionally from November this year, and other employment programmes which will be coming forward from the government in the relatively near future, we understand. So there's some bits that are getting triggered at the moment that we need to be all over and making sure that we've got a Hampshire and Solent-wide plan to address those. I think it's also worth saying, because especially for the more rural parts of the county area, there is a significant barrier to access to work for rural communities, but also in the cities. You know, I've got kids in Paulsgrove that have never even been to the seafront, so that it's a big deal for them leaving school. They don't know how things work. So there are current NEET programmes that are regularly supplementing travel for young people to unlock barriers to engagement. And in Portsmouth, we've been supporting young adults across education and work opportunities to this effect. The CCA could consider where strategic planning interventions could open up affordable travel to that vulnerable group specifically across the whole of our geography. And the final point I was going to make on this bit was in the employer demand issue that's on page 8. We've been doing some work through the Aspiration Net Zero programme, using social value initiatives and local employer engagement to demonstrate that businesses are often willing to support young people, but it does require brokerage. So we've been doing that piece of work, and there's been some huge success. I mean, there was one event I was at a couple of months ago where a young person was literally offered a paid apprenticeship in the room because we had brought some of the cohort to put them in front of the employers and for them to talk about what their barriers to work had been. And some of them presented so well because they prepared so well that they actually offered jobs on the spot. But it's making sure that we broker those connections, and that's a role that we can do leading up to when the mayor arrives with convening powers. I've got a couple of specific recommendations, but I'll leave that to the end.
Do you want to come back on these, Ruth, or?
No, I mean, they're all really useful sort of programs and suggestions that we can feed into the map. One of the things that positively, I suppose, a combined county authority can do is look at some of the rates. And I say this from someone who was part of Working Well, which was the randomised control trial that the Work and Health Unit used to, as its founding programme that led to Work Well. The only difference was in the pilot, we had about £2,000 per head of person to intervene with, and the unit price when it's got nationalised into Work Well is something like £700 a person. So the detail of the wrap round from the pilot to government mainstreaming this is it's tight margins. And I suppose that's one of the things when we look at what might make a difference to sort of say, is there something that we over and above can work with the grain of some of this to say, we just understand that it's a very basic service in the core programme, but we'd like these augmentations or add-ons when we've really done the work to think what is going to make the difference, because the risk with some of the programmes, they're very welcome, you know, Work Well, it's really welcome, is that you get the same service. And part of the issue about this and being disengaged from the labour market is you need to have a sort of strengths-based conversation where the alignment of you to the employment opportunity is going to be a success. So it's linked very much to the business and your interests. And that takes a little bit of time and a little bit of not quite a sort of sausage factory mentality in terms of the hours you get. So these are all things we should look at and welcome all the money and resource going into the region, but then perhaps look at some of those augmentations that can be made.
Sarah.
Sorry to come back. I've got quite a long list of stuff, but partly because many moons ago, I actually chaired an inquiry about how to reduce needs, and we did manage to do it for a while. And then I think COVID hit and it all started getting worse again. So one of the things I have got some sort of suggestions from officers within the council, but what I'm concerned about is making sure that we as an authority, as a combined authority, is to do the right things. It's things that work for the devolved authority versus what is right at the more local level, and that's the bit that I'm slightly unclear about. I mean, this area has always been a bit Cinderella service anyway. It hasn't really been properly funded, but it's incredibly important. And there's lots of analysis about if you get this right, it will save us all a huge amount of money. And if we get it wrong, it's really sort of tragic for the individuals, but also for us all as well. And we've got lots of evidence about this. We've got lots of particular cohorts as well that if met that intervention will make a difference, whether it's those who are care leavers or youth justice system or people with SEND, etc. So and we've got some as I said earlier, some patches of really good practice. So I suppose going back to your point earlier about being a convening body, I think it's, where would we be most useful in this space? Bringing together, highlighting best practice, maybe looking at things like the tracking of data. So there's some commonality across the whole of Hampshire. That would be amazing, because we know that most those are likely to become NEET. That is fairly well known from about the age of 14. I know we haven't got any oversight over that age group. We start at, I think, 19 or 18, whatever. But, working with those who do work with schools, etc., and then picking that up, having some common tracking system, your point about not knowing where they are, that is, we used to have something called connection service many million years ago, but it's almost like you have to reinvent some of the policies that worked in the past. Another example is the AMA. There was again another very old policy, but that was the transport idea of subsidising transport for a certain age group, which is sort of done in part, but it's still quite inadequate for many people, particularly those who are not in. It's all right if you're in a city, it's much more difficult if you're not. So I think, we've got lots of ideas. There's probably some stuff that we can share after this meeting within the members, and it would be maybe quite good to convene with key leaders in each of the authorities about what they're already doing as well. So it becomes a little bit of an early stage part, members of the advisory board on skills and employment. I guess that's probably where it best fits, isn't it? Is that, I would assume, but be guided by the chief exec on that, because I'm still finding my way.
Yeah, and the third recommendation is that we make an approach to sort of Alan Milburn and the team that led on some of this thing, exactly that, to host a series of roundtables to really get under the skin with lots of local partners, local agencies on some of these topics, so that we do bring it together. So we can take that forward as well.
Jonathan.
Thank you. This is more a topic for a conference rather than just a discussion, I think, but that's not an entirely flippant comment, because I agree with what Sarah's saying. I think what we could potentially do is just bring together those people at the sharp end who are having the ideas, are feeding us some thoughts, but can really work on those things and develop them. I wonder if there's some way we can facilitate that. On the island, there's some figures, and the island, on the face of it, looks as if it's doing quite well in comparison to other areas, but it still doesn't mean it's still not a serious problem, one that has to be addressed. I mean, with the island's demographic and ageing population, there is a very serious need to encourage young people into employment on the island, or people to come to the island to work. And yeah, I think bringing together ideas to assist that would be very positive. I very much, having had a bit of a background in postgraduate, undergraduate education, I very much approve of that finding that employment should be the outcome, not the qualification. There, I think in the past has been a lot of unnecessary, inappropriate emphasis on get that qualification, go to that institution, and it doesn't actually do a lot of good at the end of the day for certain people. It's right for some, it's wrong for others. Looking at notes I've had from officers, early intervention, yes, we sort of pick up at age 19, but if we can encourage things to be happening before then, I think that's good. The tracking point has been made, and I think, well, one thing that perhaps hasn't been mentioned, but certainly comes through in the information I've seen, is the need to reach out, help those vulnerable groups. The issues particularly affect those who have SEN provision, particularly EHCPs, and I think there is definitely the evidence that there needs to be a particular effort made in that area. Otherwise, I think we're sort of agreeing on there's an issue and working to how to best address it, but maybe it is in terms of just some formal way of bringing together those at the sharp end to really thrash this out. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments, everybody? Steve?
Yeah, so I thought about the paper and the feedback I had from officers around it. And I think if we're going to, I quite like a meeting that does something. And we've adopted lots of things today, but I quite like us to actually decide to move something forward. And look, listening to, in particular, to what Sarah's just said, we as a local authority wrote to the government saying we've got a real problem because we've got a neat cohort this year and there's no FE spaces for them. And unfortunately, the government wrote back and said, well, we know that and we haven't got any money to help. So that is a real issue across all of our local authorities, not just one. And the strategic authority now could be part of the solution to that and addressing that problem, because once those young people are lost, the cost that they have to the public purse over the rest of their lives is absolutely enormous. And it's way, way more than paying for a bus to get them to an interview, or giving them a bit of wraparound support, or brokering interactions with businesses and other stuff. It runs into hundreds of thousands of pounds per person. So I think it really is something we should be focusing on. So we could, as a combined authority, write to the DFE again, but with co-signatories from the unitaries, to say, you know, or the upper tier authorities, to say, we hear you, but this is how important that this issue is to us, because this is something that needs to be addressed nationally. There's a lot of lobbying going on. There's a reason why Alan Milburn has written his report, and he is a former Secretary of State with a lot of experience in this area. So I think just being part of the nudging process to say that the funding does need to be increased, there's no harm in that. It doesn't have to be an aggressive letter, just pointing out the facts. And then to tie together the stuff that I was saying earlier on, and that Sarah said, and also that Jonathan did, that bringing together of all of the different bits of work and mapping all that out, around place-based youth participation, I think is the overarching theme. And can we draw all that information together and then perhaps have a dedicated session where we look at what best practice looks like, some of the real successes that are going on, and how that may be replicated over a wider area, and importantly how we can fund that, but not forgetting that we need to do that in partnership with skills providers, but also linking in the NHS and education, because of that issue around SEND in particular.
Ruth is scribbling frantically. Do you want to come back on that, or?
No, they're all things, and I think it's absolutely right to sort of say, as well as sort of the lobbying, we start to bring this together and start to bring those different partners, both on the supply side, the demand side, the other partners that have got sort of like health, that have got sort of some responsibility in this, to work this through. So that's absolutely fine.
If no one's got any other comments, you've pretty much said everything that I was going to say.
Absolutely.
So, hurrah. I think I've got one question that I just wanted to kind of check with Ruth, in the sense that it's a bit about expectation management for us all as well, in terms of whether there is the capacity to, within the combined authority establishment, or whether we have the links as yet to be able to do what we'd really like to do, for example, by the next meeting, or by, you know, new year, or how that looks in terms of us being able to do things. Because I completely agree that mapping what we're all doing, and mapping where there are gaps in the service, creating an evidence baseline for us all, so that we understand where that, you know, where the challenge is, that kind of thing sounds fantastic. But do we have the capacity to do that as yet, accepting that we've, you know, only established ourselves this afternoon?
Honest answer is no. We've got to get Adult Skills Fund ready. We've got a strict deadline to that. That has got to be, because that's the statutory responsibility. We've got to prove to government that is absolutely ready by the end of this year. And we've gone out to locally recruit, ideally through a secondment to that. We are, however, really on the clock as well to do the local growth plan, independent evidence and that. And I do think there is some scope to weave some of this into that, because this is really important, as you've talked about, the blight on the economy. If you don't get employment right, is such a fundamental thing for the growth plan we do, that I think that could be a forum to hang some of this off, while working with officers to do the things that you've said there about what the local mapping is and that. So we can get underway with that, and then I think bring this together as part of the wider work that we're doing on the growth plan with you all.
And, you know, as we work our way through the next 6 weeks before we meet again in September, we have the opportunity to begin to think about which role each of us will take. And I know Sarah's really keen to get involved in the skills part of our work. But I think the important thing is that we don't lose this as well. So whilst we accept there's a capacity issue in terms of being able to bring forward exactly what we might like, bringing it forward into those different statutory bodies, the committees and the regulatory committees of the combined authority, and making sure that it's prominent there is really important, because Steve's point about this impacting deprivation, most of all, is it comes to the core of why we're all sat here. We started this journey talking about deprivation, and how creating a combined authority and working together, we can impact deprivation in each of our communities and each of our council areas, and in doing so we improve the lives of us all. So that's the really important bit. So I think,
Chairman, on resources and capacity, because what's the relationship between this body then and the constituent authorities, the district and borough councils that already exist before reorganisation, in terms of using some of that potential officer capacity in those organisations that have responsibility or some responsibility for these issues at the moment to provide that information to you? And are those connections there, and are you taking advantage of that already?
Yeah, the connections are there. I mean, we're really mindful of local government reorganisation, and you know, we do ask the question about what capacity people have got, quite honestly. But the role to lead some work on the growth plan and the role to lead some work on skills went out to all local authorities in the region first, to see if they could share any capacity with us to get those mobilised quite quickly. So we are where we can.
I was also asking more of the sort of granular stuff. So the mapping, for example, is a lot of data, isn't it? And potentially it is data that's back at the ranch at those constituent councils. And it's just a matter of that being sent over and it being brought together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think to be fair though, that's my concern. You know, it sounds easy in practice, but I know how much work is involved in collating that data, not least because it's probably in slightly different formats, different systems, and you know, that's you know, I would love us to see some kind of mapping and baseline in September, but I think it would be unreasonable of us to ask that if it's not going to be possible. But making sure that's on the work programme of the skills committee would be an important thing. Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's really useful for you to your clarity on like what the key priorities are in terms of delivery. And the growth plan for the whole of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight region obviously is one of the key ones. So I think if we can, it's just more baking it into that sounds like a sensible thing. As was alluded to earlier, the sort of the core cry to try and address the pockets of deprivation across the region is a key one, isn't it? And the main route to redressing it is always going to be through either education or employment. So you know, so I think you know this. We know we've got very high levels of worklessness still. Particularly, it's actually been very bad here actually. But we also have quite high levels of people who don't have any qualifications. It's 17% in Southampton. I think it's 15% on average across Hampshire, which is quite shocking. I mean, and that's the whole. That's from 16 to 64, but still, you know, so we've got a lot of people who just can't access work because they don't have any qualifications at all. And I've got one ward in my city that has 25% of individuals, and so we do need some ways to be quite strategic, but also allow very sort of quite micro intervention, place-based intervention, or at least fund it, which will be delivered at local level. So I think it's getting the money to where it's needed the most.
I think as well, we have established. I mean, it isn't within our remit to look at the FE colleges and their capacity, but your commentary about Leeds and Portsmouth and not having capacity for them is one really well made in terms of the challenges. And I know that we do work through both the Growth Partnership and the Prosperity Partnership with the FE colleges and the body that they have that where they coordinate, and so making sure that we don't lose that within the picture of what we do is important to think as well. And the other thing on the other note I had was on the horizon is the 1st of October when DWP merge Job Centre Plus and National Career Service together, making sure that we're engaging with DWP now, so that we are able to influence what it looks like in Hampshire and the Solent post October 1st to our benefit is probably one of those things that we should also be thinking about doing, and getting that together. So we've got some recommendations for us to look at. If everyone, is everyone happy? Sorry, should I check once? I think we've covered this. Steve, you mentioned that you might, the bits that you've said, did that cover the alterations to the recommendations or additions to the recommendations that you're talking about? Did you want to make any formal change to them?
I think the bit about actually writing, and we've just become a combined authority. I think it's really important that you sort of stick your head above the parapet and get noticed. And if it's something that all of the constituent authorities are actually concerned about, then, and I think they are from the evidence that I've seen, then subject to agreement across the on the wording of that letter, I don't think there's any harm in raising awareness of it again. I mean, the Southern Growth Partnership last year is so concerned about the NEETs issue that with some of the TEL funding that we had from the LEC, we actually put £200,000, well, it was 600,000 that we divided up across the three Solent constituent authorities, specifically for NEETs issues. But that was a one-off amount of money for 1 year. And I think, anything that we can do to make sure that we are not ignoring this issue, because these kids only get one shot at life. They're not going to wait for there to be an officer in place to write a report. They're going to end up in that situation now, and I'm really passionate about that. So I think even if it's a call to action across the constituent authorities to pull together any data that they have got into a data bank, so that as soon as there is somebody able to do it, but also consultants do exist and you don't have to spend a fortune on them. If it's that important to us, we could always look to bring in a consultancy to do that piece of prep work. It's not a fortune. If we're serious about it, and we've discussed it in depth today, and I think we are serious about it, we ought to actually do something. Whilst I also recognise that a part of it will go into the Growth Hub work, having a full picture of what should be in the growth plan, the Solent Growth Plan, the Hampshire Solent Growth Plan will be really important, because how do you know what should be in the growth plan if you don't know the quantum of what you're talking about? So I do think that call to action is important.
I think so. I think that latter bit about the data and the baseline and the mapping is probably captured by recommendation A in terms of deciding what analysis. And we've got that sort of as part of our debate today. And I think the important thing is that this is brought back at some point to the combined authority for us to understand that that's where it's going, and perhaps we do that as an action from the minutes of today. Perhaps what we do is just add to recommendation C to agree that we also write to DWP and to the Minister, possibly once they're whoever the new Minister is in place. DFE would be DFE. Once they are in place, to also make the point about our aspiration and concern here as well. That becomes an addition to recommendation C, if we're happy with that. Yeah. Okay. In which case, I think we understand where we are. We've got the recommendations in A to C. I'm happy to propose those. Jonathan seconding. Everyone agreed? Yeah. Super, thanks very much. And so our final item is just to look at the calendar of meetings for the next year. I think that is something Susan's going to cover for us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. But before I do, may I please correct something I said at item 6, because something was niggling me and I just thought I would check the regulations. When we were discussing whether or not changes to the Constitution required a unanimous vote of this meeting, you were correct, Chair. That's only in place until the mayor is appointed. So I beg your pardon for that, and I'd like to correct that advice. Thank you.
Thank you. That's okay. As I say, every day is a school day for us all. So. Okay, so we've got a list of meetings at 3.3, which runs from page 438 to 439, which looks at not only our meetings, but also those meetings of the Overview and Scrutiny and Governance and Audit Committees that will be formed alongside us from October onwards. Do we need to agree those? So just need to approve them. Yeah. Everyone happy? Good. in which case, I think that's our first meeting over. Can I just say as well, in my thanks, I forgot to also just say thank you and mention to possibly the two most patient people in the room who have stuck with all sorts of different changes along the way, Munira and Claire. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to kind of establish things, because before Ruth arrived, they dealt with us all, or they dealt with the previous four leaders extraordinarily patiently and kept very neutral faces at different times when people were suggesting different things. So thank you so much. Forgot to mention that. But thank you everyone for our first meeting, and we will see you all again in September. And I should look to see where we're meeting. I think it's Portsmouth. Portsmouth. You don't have to go far.
No.
You're good.